Good evening, dear students. Welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today we will be discussing few important news articles that are given in the Hindu newspaper. So we will discuss all those news articles one by one so that we can cover most of the topics for your prelims and mains examination. So these topics are most relevant for prelims and mains examinations. So as a practice, we have been discussing the prelims practice question also every day. Yesterday also have given you one prelims practice question. The question was, the Central Pollution Control Board was constituted under which of the following legislations? So please understand, the Central Pollution Control Board was a legislative or a statutory body. So legislative body or a statutory body is the one which is formed by an act of parliament, and that is known as the statutory body. The Central Pollution Control Board is a statutory body and that was established under the provisions of the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. Along with the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, the Central Pollution Control Board has also given the jurisdiction over the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. However, the correct answer for this question is option B, the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974. The Central Pollution Control Board is a statutory body. It is a statutory organization and it is under the administration or administrative jurisprudence of Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. Okay, so this is a statutory body which is formed by the Act of the Parliament, and it was established in the year 1974 under the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. And apart from the above mentioned legislation, this particular board, Central Pollution Control Board, has also entrusted with the functions and responsibilities under the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. So as I have already told, that the correct answer for this question is option B, that is the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974 has provided for the establishment of Central Pollution Control Board. Please remember, this is a statutory body which is formed by an act of the Parliament. So today's practice question, a very important question, and this bird species is regularly in news. Consider the following statements about the Great Indian Bustard. The options are, the Great Indian Bustard is omnivorous. So omnivorous is a species which eat both vegetarian and non-vegetarian. Okay, so there are certain species which can be considered as herbivorous and there are certain species which can be considered as carnivorous also. Now omnivorous species have the characteristic of both herbivorous and carnivorous. So the first option says it is a omnivorous bird. Second option, it is listed critically endangered in the IUCN Red List. Third option, its population is confined mostly to the Eastern Ghats. So which of the following statements are correct in this question? Please answer the question in the comment section. However, the correct answer I will be providing you in the comment section. Okay, so tomorrow I'll be giving you the correct answer. Please comment the correct answer in the comment section. So the first article, the first editorial that we are going to deal with today is with respect to the recent verdict of the Supreme Court with respect to climate change and also the habitat of the Great Indian Bustard. So please understand, the habitat of the Great Indian Bustard is fragmented in nature. Okay, so that is increasingly fragmented, and at the same time the Great Indian Bustard, a species, it is a critically endangered species, So wait, sorry, right. So it is a critically endangered species, Great Indian Bustard. So the habitat of the Great Indian Bustard is essentially located in the present day Rajasthan, Gujarat, arid and semi-arid regions, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. So we'll understand the context first, and we will also understand what exactly the author has been emphasizing on in this article. So we all knew that Supreme Court of India recently acknowledged the fundamental right to be free from adverse impacts of climate change. So we all knew that climate change has been posing new threats. So not just for the human beings, but also for the wild populations, climate change has been facing new threats. Now, new threats in a way of increasing intensity of droughts, heat wave conditions, and floods, wildfires or forest fires. All these things are creating a lot of challenges for the human beings as well as the wild flora and fauna. So because of that reason, the Supreme Court has recently recognized climate change is part of the fundamental rights under Article 14, right to equality, and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So thereby the Supreme Court essentially recognized the right to the right to proper livelihood against the climate change. So therefore adverse impacts of climate change, and this is considered as a most significant judgment. And now in this editorial we will examine the implications of this judgment beyond the protection of Great Indian Bustard, focusing on inclusive climate action. So this is the species that you are seeing here is the Great Indian Bustard. Now Great Indian Bustard has been facing habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. The bird populations have also been significantly declining, and it is now having around 150 bird species. And as per IUCN Red List, this bird species is critically endangered. So once the populations further declines, it could degrade into the category of extinct in the wild, and then extinction of this bird species if conservation measures were not undertaken, right? So we all knew that how Supreme Court recognized the climate change right. The Supreme Court recognized the existence of a right against the adverse impact of climate change. Okay, understand, this is right against the adverse impact of the climate change. So essentially in the backdrop of increasing intensity, increasing negative consequences of climate change on human beings and on the environment. Now the Supreme Court has recognized right against adverse effects of climate change as part of Article 14 and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So however, we have to understand the future implications of this judgment by the Supreme Court. So what will be the implications if Supreme Court has recognized this right? So implication in the sense that how it will impact the human populations, how it will impact the wildlife populations, what are the major responsibilities of the government with respect to dealing with the climate change. So all those implications have to be understood in clear way. So in fact, the Supreme Court's judgment with respect to the right against climate change is not binding. We cannot say that it is completely binding on the state, because climate change and the negative impacts created by the climate change are beyond the human scope to deal with. So we can do little to deal with the negative consequences of climate change, and at the same time it also requires a comprehensive and a concerted action from the all quarters of the world. So every country need to do its bit to reduce climate change and its negative consequences. And because of this reason, it is not binding on the government. However, we can clearly and certainly say that this particular judgment of the Supreme Court So that is the right against the adverse effects of climate change can be a foundation stone for future climate action. Okay, so future climate action can be based on the Supreme Court's recent judgment and the legal developments that took place in our country. So that ensures we deal with the climate change and its negative consequences in a more effective and a more inclusive, comprehensive manner in a country like India. So however, the other thing that we need to understand here is that a just transition framework is very important. Now, what does just transition framework actually means? So I will explain you in a very simple terms here. Now our economies are dependent on fossil fuels, or we have been excessively using fossil fuels for our energy requirements. However, the governments have been making efforts to make a transition towards the renewable fuels. Because renewable fuels would not emit carbon into the atmosphere, and that would not increase the global warming and minimize the climate change and its negative consequences. Now, the transition that we are making from the fossil fuels to the renewable fuels is considered as a transition. Okay, an economic transition, a green economic transition, because now we will be less depending on fossil fuels and we have been significantly increasing our reliance on renewable fuels. However, the author has been suggesting that the Supreme Court's judgment with respect to the right against adverse impact of climate change provided an opportunity for a just transition framework. So this transition must be just. So in the sense, it should be inclusive in nature, it should be sustainable in nature, inclusive and sustainable in nature, and in the name of making transition to renewable fuels, we should not create new problems for the existing wildlife or wildlife populations. Now I will clearly explain this, how even making a transition creating new challenges for species. So imagine windmills are set up in few locations, because wind is one of the renewable fuel. So these windmills also pose a significant challenge to various bird species. So that could also reduce the number of bird species in that particular area. So therefore, what we should look for is make a right transition or a just transition. So for that, we should have a just transition framework. So it is also said that the judgment highlighted the competing choices between the biodiversity protection and mitigative climate action. Now you can clearly see that it is in conflict. Okay, so a conflict in the sense, installing a windmill is a mitigative of climate change because it produces wind from the natural resources and it is a renewable form of future and it does not emit any form of carbon. But on the other hand, the increased collision of birds with these windmills reduces their population. So therefore, you can clearly see that there are competing choices between biodiversity protection and mitigative climate action. And now we are specifically talking about the great Indian bustard and their declining populations. Now in this context, we must have a proper plan to conserve and protect the habitat of the great Indian bustard, a critically endangered species, so that we can prevent the extinction of the species in the wild. So what should be the role of just transition that we should understand? Now, when I say a just transition, so we should take care of these competing choices between the biodiversity conservation, biodiversity protection, and the environment, and also the mitigation of the climate change and its adverse impacts. So we also make sure that this just transition must be equitable and inclusive climate action. So that essentially means that we must take care of the protection of biodiversity, and at the same time we should also look to mitigate the negative consequences of climate change, and both these factors are very important and they should be undertaken hand in hand. So that is how we can ensure inclusive and equitable climate action in the future, especially for the Indian context, and this just transition will also help the great Indian bustard habitat and their populations. So what will be the major advantages of just transition? So there are a lot of advantages that are being associated with this just transition, because now we will ensure that both the climate change mitigation and at the same time the biodiversity protection or biodiversity conservation should go hand in hand, and that protect and respect the rights of the wild populations. And at the same time, we can make a just transition. We can reduce our dependence on the traditional fuels, which are very often carbon intensive. And we can also reduce the levels of global warming. Please remember, when we talk about a balanced development, we must emphasize on the economic growth and development. We should also emphasize on biodiversity conservation protection. And at the same time, we must be able to mitigate the negative consequences of the climate change. So that is very important here. So however, in order to do that, a set of measures have to be undertaken by the government in order to achieve an inclusive climate action. Now when I say climate action should not be focused or should not be specific to one particular region or one particular sector. It must be inclusive. It must benefit all the sections of the society. It must benefit all the communities. So that is how we can ensure the inclusive climate action. And that is very important here. So promoting inclusive and equitable climate action so will ensure that the climate justice as a goal is met. And we can reduce the vulnerabilities of the weaker sections through inclusive climate action. So for that, we must build the capacities of those weaker sections. So in order to ensure the inclusive climate action. And in this respect, there is a need for the participation of a wide variety of stakeholders, not just the government. So that include state government, central government, local governments, NGOs, civil societies, and environmental groups and academics. Everyone should be involved in the inclusive climate action. So that is how we can ensure an inclusive climate action, and we will also be able to ensure that Article 14 and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, the right against the adverse climate change effects, can be fulfilled. And we must shape a positive discourse on the climate rights. Now there is an increased recognition of climate rights for the human beings and for the wildlife populations also. And because of this reason, there is a need to shape a healthy discourse on the climate rights also. Okay, so recognition of right against climate change initiates a discourse, a debate on its content, emphasizing on inclusivity and effectiveness. Stakeholder engagement is very important and very crucial in shaping and implementing all these rights. So when we are able to implement different stakeholders in this process, we will be able to know the shortcomings, we will be able to know the drawbacks of the existing policies and the government interventions. So no one left behind in this climate action. So that is the essence of inclusive and equitable climate action. Inclusive and equitable climate action. Okay. And now we will understand the potential for progress also. There's a huge potential for the progress in the future. So for that, there is a need for the collaboration and cooperation between different stakeholders. So that can be helpful in achieving significant progress in climate action and biodiversity conservation, ensuring the balanced approach that protects both human beings and non-human interests also. Now, if you can see the great Indian bustard, as I have already told you that it is listed as the critically endangered species in the IUCN red list. The wild populations of Great Indian Bustard is less than 150 birds, and its range mostly include the arid and semi-arid regions of Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and parts of the Andhra Pradesh also. So if you can look at this bird, according to the latest population assessment, the largest population of Great Indian Bustard is the area in Rajasthan. So Rajasthan holds the largest populations of Great Indian Bustard. Especially the Desert National Park in Rajasthan or Jaisalmer extends to Jodhpur is home to around 170 Great Indian Bustard. And most of the deaths to the Great Indian bird species have been taking place because of the electrocution, the electric lines which are passing through the habitat of the Great Indian Bustard. So that is the major responsibility for the deaths of Great Indian Bustard. So as of now, only 5 breeding sites left for the Great Indian Bustard. So in fact, the National Conservation Great Indian Bustard breeding program involves the state government of Gujarat, Rajasthan and Maharashtra, and it will be supervised by Wildlife Institute of India. So the Wildlife Institute of India team finalizes a size of a Great Indian Bustard hatching facility in Jaisalmer so that we can further increase the bird populations in a controlled setting, in a controlled environment, so that the bird will not go extinct. So next important news article is with respect to the rainfall. So we all knew that India receives rainfall through southwest monsoon, and second northeast monsoon. But if you look at the total rainfall that India receives, or Indian subcontinent receives, 70% of the rainfall is received by the southwest monsoon alone. And we also knew that during the first week of June or the last week of May, the southwest monsoon touches the western coast of India, especially the Kerala coast. So the southwest monsoon is divided into 2 main branches. One is Arabian branch and the second is Bay of Bengal branch. However, these monsoon winds spread throughout the Indian subcontinent by the August and September, and that would receive in higher rainfall across the Indian subcontinent. So once these winds spread well over the Indian subcontinent, by the time of September and mid of October, they start receding, and the receding monsoon or the reversal of monsoon winds is known as northeast monsoon. So the coast of Tamil Nadu and southern Andhra Pradesh receives highest rainfall through the northeast monsoon. So the southwest monsoon and northeast monsoon are primarily caused by the shift of intertropical convergence zone. So this is a low pressure zone. So during May and June times, the intertropical convergence zone is shifted to the northern plains, and during September and October, this would be shifted to the southern Indian Ocean or northern Indian Ocean, the intertropical convergence zone. So this intertropical convergence zone actually attract the monsoon winds, and that results in moisture laden winds bringing rainfall over the Indian subcontinent during the rainy season. Okay, so that is also associated with the Kharif and Rabi seasons in India. Now what is the context? So the context is that recently Indian Meteorological Organization or Indian Meteorological Department predicted that India would see a higher amount of rainfall in this year. So it is also expected that the total rainfall would be higher than 6% of the previous year, or 6% higher than the average rainfall. So that could result in a potentially bountiful monsoon, a good rainfall over the Indian subcontinent as per the Indian Meteorological Department's predictions. However, the higher rainfall could have a lot of implications on Indian agriculture. There's no doubt about that. because Indian agriculture is primarily rain-fed agriculture. So since it is a rain-fed agriculture, so excess rainfall would also have implications, whether it is positive implications or negative implications, but Indian agriculture would definitely impacted by the good rainfall or higher rainfall. And after that, floods is also another major problem that we have been facing. So disaster preparedness and agriculture implications of this bountiful monsoon rainfall is a concern in the wake of the predictions by the Indian Meteorological Department. Now in this editorial, we will analyze the forecast and highlight the need for proactive measures to mitigate these potential risks. Now first understand what is the what exactly the forecast telling us about this Indian monsoon. So as I have already told you that Indian Meteorological Department predicts 6% surplus rainfall from June and September period. And in fact, it is indicating that there would be 30% of more rainfall than the average rainfall. Okay, so 30% of the more rainfall actually means that it could create a flood-like situation in the low-lying areas, and it could also have severe implications for Indian agriculture, which is primarily a rain-fed agriculture. So therefore, it could also result in floods in several Indian cities and other areas. And increased floods would also damage the existing infrastructure. Okay, so all these things are a major concern for us. Now, when we get to know about the excess rainfall or the chances of floods because of the excess rainfall, then we would take necessary precautionary measures, or we would prepare for the excess rainfall. And we would also make sure that the water harvesting structures are built. So everything could ensure that the floods or excess rainfall would not turn into floods or the damage infrastructure, because when there is a chance of excess floods, we would audit the existing dams capacity, audit of dams and its capacity, and we will also further improve our early warning systems of floods. And we will build the capacities of urban local bodies to deal with the flood like situation. So preparedness is very important in the wake of expectations or predictions for a higher rainfall. Now, what are the major factors which have been influencing this forecast by the Indian Meteorological Department? So there are certain developments here. So one development is La Nina, the impact of La Nina and the positive Indian Ocean dipole. So please remember, whenever we face the El Nino situation, the Indian subcontinent would experience lesser rainfall. Whenever there is El Nino like condition, and at the same time the negative Indian Ocean dipole, we experience deficit rainfall over the Indian subcontinent. But on the other hand, whenever we have the La Nina situation along with positive Indian Ocean dipole, then we can experience surplus rainfall over the Indian subcontinent, and that is what has been influencing the forecast of the Indian Meteorological Department. So there will be a La Nina condition along with the positive Indian Ocean dipole. Now, positive Indian Ocean dipole actually means that the warming of the Western Indian Ocean compared to the Eastern Indian Ocean. Okay, so the Western Indian Ocean would be warmed. So that would attract winds from across different regions, and that would further augment the southwest monsoon and would receive higher rainfall. Okay, so these two factors could lead to the increased rainfall, especially in the southern states, especially in all these southern states. Now, what would be the major implications for agriculture and disaster management? There are a lot of implications for agriculture. Firstly, why? Because I've already told you that agriculture is primarily rain-fed in India. So since it is a rain-fed in India, so rain-fed actually means sowing, harvesting, everything takes place based on the rainfall of a region. So Indian agriculture is excessively depends on rainfall. So increased amounts or more than the average rainfall poses challenges for disaster management and agriculture. Okay, so lessons from the past floods such as 2018 Kerala floods, they have underscored the importance of proactive preparedness measures. So those things are very important. Now, what preventive measures must be undertaken in the backdrop of these predictions by the Indian Meteorological Department? So firstly, we must take measures that ensure urgent disaster preparedness. So in this context, states must swiftly develop the emergency plans and strengthen their disaster management infrastructure. So emergency plans in the sense that they must audit the existing dams, their safety and the storage levels in those dams firstly, because floods would further increase those water levels on those dams. And secondly, we must also take care of the flood plains of different rivers, because excess rainfall would lead to the floods, and that could even pose risks to the people who are living in the flood plains of various rivers. So after that, we should also revamp our early warning systems to these floods. So revamping the early warning systems to these floods will make sure that the administrative agencies and other important agencies are well prepared to deal with any situation that is being created by the excessive or torrential rainfall. So all these measures must be undertaken on an immediate basis, because we are already in April and May, hardly left 1 month. In June, we will experience the higher rainfall as per the predictions of the Indian Meteorological Department. And after that, we must enhance awareness among the farmers, and we should also enhance the adaptations with respect to new crops that can tolerate the higher rainfall. Okay, so farmers, they primarily rely on rain-fed agriculture, and there is a need to increase awareness and inform the farmers about the weather patterns, and they should adjust their sowing operations and adopt the resilient farming practices to mitigate the risks which are being associated with the excessive rainfall. See, if farmers cultivated rice, excess rainfall or flood-like situation could pose risks to the rice crop, and either that could reduces the productivity or that would also result in crop failure. So therefore, when we increase awareness among the farmers, they can cultivate the water resistant crop varieties, or they can change their sowing patterns as per the rainfall predictions, so that the farmers will not become vulnerable, and at the same time the productivity of the agriculture can also be ensured in this Kharif season. And apart from that, a concerted and a focused action from the government and coordination of different levels of government is also very important in this context. So there are a lot of government agencies at different levels, so all these government agencies must coordinate efforts to ensure timely response and effective disaster mitigation or disaster management. So that is very important, the collaboration and coordination between all the government agencies. So that ensures the effective disaster mitigation. So collaboration between the meteorological departments that regularly provide inputs over the rainfall and the areas which receive highest rainfall, and at the same time the disaster management agencies or authorities such as National Disaster Response Force and State Disaster Response Force and local communities is essential for proactive risk reduction. And at the same time, we must build the capacities of the existing local bodies, that also includes the urban local bodies, to deal with the flood like event, because now Indian cities have become more vulnerable to these floods. We must be able to tackle the flood like situation in urban centers also. So that's all in this article. So we briefly discuss about how small scale farmers benefit from trees on farms. So this is a very closely associated with the concept called agroforestry. Agroforestry. Now, due to climate change, so we all knew that climate change has been excessively impacting the agricultural incomes of the farmers. They have been impacting first the agricultural productivity, and lower agricultural productivity has also impacting the agriculture income of the farmers. So since keeping this in mind, there was a new concept that is being developed that is known as agroforestry. So that is cultivating plants along with the crops. So that ensures a diversified incomes for the farmers firstly, and it ensures income security and livelihood security for the farmers, and it also provides essential ecosystem services such as moderating the local climates, recharging the groundwater tables, and sequestration of carbon, because remember, these plants are essentially the source of carbon. So all these ecosystem services are being provided by the agroforestry. However, if you look at a country like India, it is said that more than 83% of our farmers are small and marginal farmers. So therefore, because of this huge number of small and marginal farmers, we must encourage the small and marginal farmers or small scale farmers to adopt the agroforestry practices, because they have they can achieve the twin objectives of increasing the farm incomes on the one hand, achieving the livelihood security, and also ensure the environmental sustainability along with the mitigating the negative consequences of the climate change. So because of all those advantages that are being associated with the agroforestry, we must emphasize on small and marginal farmer adopting the agroforestry practices. Right. So what was the context? Please understand the context briefly. So the context was agroforestry is the practice of integrating or cultivation of trees, plants along with crops and livestock. And in fact, this holds one of the significant promise to the small scale farmers to increase their incomes, to secure and protect their livelihoods at the local level. So because of that reason, the agroforestry is being increasingly emphasized. And apart from that, it also holds certain benefits in the sense that it can protect the soil health, and it can improve the biodiversity of those regions, and it increases the crop productivity, because once the soil health or soil fertility is increased, so that will also have the positive impact on the crop productivity, and it also significantly increases the farmer incomes. However, despite a huge potential of agroforestry to enhance the livelihoods and promote the sustainable land use, but the adoption of agroforestry among the small landholder farmers, so across the country, have been facing a number of challenges. Not all small and marginal farmers have been adopting to this agroforestry methods. Why? Because there is a limited access to finance, and there is no such policy from the government which promotes or encourages small and marginal farmers to adopt the agroforestry practices. And at the same time, they do not have adequate technical knowledge about the agroforestry practices, and market linkages are also poor. So all these factors are major shortcomings or major barriers in adoption of agroforestry by the small scale farmers, even though it holds a lot of potential or lot of promise for the small scale farmers. However, overcoming these barriers is very important, or it is very crucial for harnessing the full benefits of agroforestry and promoting resilient farming systems. So enhancing agroforestry for small scale farmers. So how can we enhance agroforestry for small scale farmers? So first and foremost, it could unlock the livelihood opportunities for the small scale farmers. So as I have already told you that cultivation of plants along with the livestock and other crops would ensure the livelihood security by improving the incomes of the farmers. Now, increasing the farmers' incomes is one of the goal of the government, or doubling farmers' income is the one of the goal of the government. So this goal can be achieved through the agroforestry practices. And in agroforestry, we must integrate trees with the crops and livestock. And by doing this, farmers can harness multiple benefits. So multiple benefits in the sense increased productivity, soil fertility enhancement, and additional income sources. However, there are certain challenges in the adoption of agroforestry. So the challenges include limited access to finance, and at the same time, higher initial investments, lack of technical knowledge, and inadequate market linkages for tree-based products. So all these are some of the challenges that the farmers have been facing. So however, the policy support is required in this context. So the government policies actually play a very important and a very vital role. So therefore, the government should come up with policies which encourage farmers adopting the agroforestry practices. So those policies should include the financial support to the farmers who undertake agroforestry, and along with the financial support, the government should also incentivize them, the farmers, and at the same time the market linkages are also very important to adopt the agroforestry practices. Because remember, the agroforestry practices are very often considered as sustainable, and they also result in sustainable land use practices and equitable distribution of benefits across the different communities within the local areas. So however, there are certain barriers or certain concerns with respect to adoption of agroforestry. So what are those barriers? Firstly, water scarcity is one of the most important challenge. So lack of availability of water is, so even though water is available, unscientific irrigation practices have been creating the challenges of water scarcity. So therefore, we must focus on addressing the water availability issues or water scarcity issues. So this requires an innovative solution, for example, adopting drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation. And apart from that, we must cultivate trees so that can grow in the less water conditions also. Okay, so less water intensive trees must be selected and they must be grown to meet the water scarcity challenge. And at the same time, we must leverage tools for water accounting to optimize the resource allocation also. So after that, we must promote the native species. So there are some native species and invasive alien species also. So the problem with the invasive alien species is that, so they actually dominate the region over a period of time. And they also destroy the native plant species, and they also damage the native animal populations. So therefore, we must promote the native tree species rather than choosing the alien species, so which damage and destroy the ecosystems and endemic plant species. So the choice of tree species plays a crucial role in the success of agroforestry systems. While fast growing non-native species may offer short-term benefits, they can be having a detrimental effects on the soil health and biodiversity of a region. And apart from that, the government must come up with the financial support mechanisms for these small and marginal farmers. So financial supporting, incentivizing these small and marginal farmers, and apart from that, providing market linkages to these farmers will ensure they adopting the agroforestry practices in a large scale. And apart from that, they should provide technical knowledge, and farmers must be provided the hand holding support at the initial scale. So therefore, all these practices would ensure the adoption of agroforestry. So the government can enable the policy environment for the adoption of agroforestry. So firstly, the government must undertake the tailored policy interventions. Okay, so these tailored policy interventions include financial incentives, technical assistance, and also the market linkages that could promote agroforestry and sustainable land use practices. And after that, we should look at the certification schemes. So these certification schemes are also very important to further enhance the market linkages of agroforestry and benefiting the farmers. However, these certification schemes should not become a barrier for the small and marginal farmers because of their limited capacity. Rather, these certification schemes in fact incentivize the farmers who adopt agroforestry practices. And after that, there are certain ecosystem based approaches, so they must be adopted here also. So adopting ecosystem based approaches such as payment for ecosystem services provide economic incentives for smaller landholder farmers in engaging agroforestry. So all these must be taken care of to benefit the farmer through the agroforestry practices. So just look at the another important article, that is Russian troops start to withdraw from the Nagorno and Karabakh. So please understand, this Nagorno and Karabakh is a disputed region between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So recently it is also in news that India has intensified or increased its military supplies to Armenia in Europe. So this is the region that you are seeing here. Highlighted region is known as Nagorno and Karabakh region, and this Nagorno and Karabakh region is a disputed region between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Now we'll look into the details of this. So Azerbaijan earlier launched a military operation. So this is the disputed region. The highlighted part is disputed region, and this is Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan earlier launched a military operation in this disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. So that has resulted in casualties and significant tensions in Europe between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Okay, so now why it is launched a military operation in Nagorno and Karabakh? So this region, the Nagorno and Karabakh region, is actually considered as part of the Azerbaijan. However, it is controlled by the ethnic Armenians. So this region is controlled by ethnic Armenians, but this is part of the Azerbaijan. And it has been a source of conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan since decades. And recent escalation in 2020 and 2023 are also a result of a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over this conflicted region from decades. Okay, so this Nagorno and Karabakh conflict is an ethnic territorial dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So please remember, so this region belongs to Azerbaijan, but this region is controlled by the ethnic Armenians. So because of this reason, there was a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it centers on the Nagorno-Karabakh region, and it is predominantly Armenian populated but with Azerbaijan's borders. So it is located within the Azerbaijan's borders, but it is having Armenian population. A ceasefire was mediated by Russia in the year 1994 between Armenia and Azerbaijan over this Nagorno-Karabakh region. So that has undermined the Armenian control in this region, though it's still recognized as part of the Azerbaijan. So this is a briefly the history of dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So recently the Russian troops start to withdraw from the conflict or disputed region. Okay, so Russian peacekeepers have begun to withdraw from the Nagorno-Karabakh following Azerbaijan's recapture of this disputed territory from the Armenian separatist group last year. Okay, so Azerbaijan state media reported that this week Russian troops had begun leaving their positions as Moscow has brokered a peace deal between Baku and Yerevan. Yerevan was the capital of Armenia and Baku was the capital of Azerbaijan. Okay, so Russia earlier deployed 2,000 strong peacekeeping force as part of the deal to end the bloody 6-week offensive in 2020 that saw Azerbaijani forces seize the parts of Nagorno-Karabakh and surrounding areas. So in fact, this Nagorno and Karabakh was also asked by UPSC in prelims examination. So therefore, this is also important. So that's all in this lecture today, and thank you so much. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.